Well, hello there. How is everyone? I hope you're all well, you amazing, amazing, beautiful, wonderful people. Guess what? That's it. It's the midweek hump, baby. It's the midweek hump already. This week is flying. And I thought I would jump on because I want to touch on something, and I know this video is going to be a room splitter, okay? Because we have a suspect in the Colorado shooting, the Colorado University shooting that we spoke about the other day. And the suspect is a guy by the name of Nicholas Jordan, a 25-year-old. And he just happens to have been a roommate of Samuel, which was one of the two that was shot. We had the Samuel, we had the girl or the young adult female, and she was not, she didn't come from there. She wasn't there. She was visiting. So let's just put it this way, right? Like, nothing has been set in stone as to what had happened at this university as yet. But you can bet your bollocks to a barn dancer it was one of only a few things. Obviously, well, you could say that this guy just flat out shot them for nothing. Absolutely nothing. It was unprovoked. It was just for shits and giggles. We did a video, didn't we, on shits and giggles, and maybe it was that. Maybe it was something to do with the relationship between the two victims that this Jordan fella just didn't like. Okay? Maybe that's what happened, and it was this love triangle situation. Or there was narcotics involvement. And, you know, this has nothing to do with a race situation, as we see that we now have a black shooter and white victims. And I know that this is going to start some of the balls rolling to do with it being a racially motivated crime. And it could well be a racially motivated crime, but there still has to be a catalyst to that. Unless it's just for shits and giggles. Do you see what I mean? But what I want to ask people, and I'd be interested to hearing your opinions, is when you look at the Idaho 4 case, we have, for a long time, we've pondered over the guilt of Bryan Christopher Kohberger, the guy who was sat in Idaho County for some time awaiting trial for the murders of the 4 Idaho 4 victims. Some of us have felt that there wasn't enough evidence that's come forward, and the evidence that has come forward is circumstantial at best, and some of it can be very easily explained. And sometimes we can think to ourselves, look, was the golden goose, so to speak, the knife sheath, something that could have been planted on that scene in order to perhaps bring this to a close quickly? And I want you to think of this, like in both the Colorado Springs shooting and the Idaho 4 stabbings, law enforcement came straight out the gate from the very, very start, and it was, there is no active threat to the community. Obviously the initial is to lock down, but very, very quickly they turn around and say, look, we can now get on with our day. There is no further threat. This is isolated. This is targeted. And I think to myself, in the Colorado Springs situation, I'm guessing that they very quickly knew what had happened in this situation. So they came out swinging, and they knew that this was an isolated incident because they knew that perhaps there was a situation there. Now, whether that was through having a conversation with people on campus or whether that was prior knowledge of issues here, and they tied those two together. And they knew that there was a probability of what was going on in that situation could have led to where we found with the crime. So that's why they were confident enough to come out and say, look, this was isolated, this was targeted, there is no further need for concern. And then we have the Idaho 4 situation where they came out and said exactly the same. This is targeted, this is isolated. And then they very quickly had to retract that statement and backpedal. Now, in the Idaho 4 case, did we have a similar situation where there was prior knowledge of issues that surrounded that house and surrounded the students within it, that it gave them a very strong feeling that this this could have happened. When you factor in what was going on in the house, who was in the house, what was surrounding the house, that it very much was confidently an isolated and targeted event. Now, obviously, we can't, with the only difference between the Colorado Springs situation and the Moscow, Idaho situation is that we have, in the Moscow, Idaho situation, a Bryan Kohberger. Now, we have to understand that this is now extremely important how Bryan Kohberger got placed in the position that he's in. Because if Bryan Kohberger got placed in the position that he is in by someone saying that he was there, so what I'm talking about is an eyewitness who we haven't heard about yet, or someone had come forward and pointed the finger at Bryan Kohberger, then you have to ascertain why that was. Why did someone point the finger at this guy and say he did it? Now, was it deflective? Was something else and they needed to find someone else who was a perfect patsy for the crime? Now, we don't necessarily have to be looking at law enforcement and say law enforcement have done anything wrong. But what I will say is if law enforcement have had a tip-off and they believe that tip-off to be accurate and they trust it, but they cannot prove it, but they want to bring this situation to a close as soon as possible, then there is your incentive to do something like, let's say, plant a knife sheath. And I'm not saying they did, but I'm saying that this is how things happen. And I did a video yesterday that some of you watched that spoke about an officer who had, I believe he was from Kentucky, who had been involved in the murder case, like 3 murder cases, and this is where these people have been put in prison, jail, and lost decades of their life because he lied, he manipulated things, he wrote things down that were untrue knowingly, and at the end of the day, he ended up with a 3-year sentence, well, 3 one-year sentences to run concurrently, so he was ever going to, at maximum, do a year incarcerated, and he walked out of jail 17 days after walking in. And that's a cop who has lied, knowingly lied, both verbally and writing documents down and fabricating evidence and talking shite in order to obtain a result, and a result that put people away for decades. Decades. Can you imagine that? Now, don't get me wrong, some of these people were compensated to the tune of $20 million, but ain't enough. The ripples of that go out and out and out and out and out. But anyway, I digress. What we're talking about here is the Idaho 4. And does what we've seen over in Colorado Springs mean that we need to open our eyes a little bit to the possibilities in the Idaho 4 situation? Yes, we do have Bryan Kohberger, and Bryan Kohberger could be guilty. Of course he could. Bryan Kohberger could be a lone killer. Bryan Kohberger could also be part of a bigger picture. There could have been Bryan Kohberger and so-and-so and so-and-so. We do not know that yet. That has not been concluded yet. And I know that there are people out there who feel that when you look at Bryan Kohberger and you look at the crime itself and how the crime itself actually happened, they struggle to see how this single solitary killer with just being Bryan, what we know about Bryan. And don't get me wrong, we don't know everything about him, but we know things about him. And we have to believe that not only was he someone who had the time to not only stalk these people and do reconnaissance on the house, but learn about locked doors, unlocked doors, who was in what room, who was where, what was going on the night, who was in the house, who wasn't in the house, where were they in the house. To go there to have the stones to go there in your own car, drive literally right up to the house near enough, and then enter this house and very, very quickly and seemingly skillfully do this crime. And I say skillfully because of the time that we believe it took, sub 8 minutes to do the entire thing, and including not really rousing anyone, the 2 surviving roommates. They heard something, but they didn't hear enough, apparently. But it makes you wonder when you factor in other little elements of this as well, because all of the parents around these victims over in Moscow, Idaho, there was something going on that you could turn around, and I say all of them, and that's wrong. Not all of them, but a large proportion of their families, they had stuff going on in the background that if that was left long enough or went in a certain direction, or someone took a grudge, or someone had a hump about something, it could have potentially led to what we saw in Idaho. Like I say, the only thing that stopped all of that abruptly was the injection of Bryan Kohberger into the situation. So I ask your opinions down below. Should and does the Colorado Springs situation, where we see roommates killing one another, and there's got to be a reason for that. We'll find that out later. We might, but after this video actually has been filmed and goes out, there may be more information. But as of filming this video now, you know, we don't have that information. But roommates killing roommates on campus, we have considered whether the arguments, whether narcotic involvement, but specifically did arguments and bad feelings sort of get out of hand? Was there situations with people being jealous? We've heard about the situation at the frat house, and what was that argument about? Let me know down below, and I'll catch you all in the next one.